Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Now we've reached the point where we can discuss what are the main fundamentals of a khutbah. What are the things that you must not leave out? Inshallah, we will discuss these things one by one. But like many areas in fiqh, there are differences of opinion. Some of the scholars, such as the Hanafis, classically speaking at least, have the least amount of requirements for a khutbah. So what is reported from the Hanafi scholars is that for a khutbah to be valid, it just must contain the dhikr of Allah, maybe one verse of the Quran as the minimum requirement. Now, when you say minimum requirement, it doesn't mean that that's what we should do, of course. It just means that, technically speaking, if something happened, there was nothing given except for one ayah of Quran, then, according to the Hanafis at least, it would suffice. My point here is not to go through the difference of opinion. My point is to tell you that, according to some scholars, there are different things that need to be required. So what I'm going to present is the most comprehensive list. A list that, according to all scholars, Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanbalis, this would definitely be more than enough to meet the minimum requirements for a khutbah. So what are these things? First and foremost, a khutbah must contain the praise of Allah. Saying Alhamdulillah is the very minimum. So praise of Allah is something that must be said. The second thing that must be said is salah upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, saying Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Something shorter than that or something longer than that is the second thing. The third is to give admonition, a maw'idha. An admonition basically means that you make people feel mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, conscious of Allah, and there's some type of warning given about the akhirah or about Allah's punishment, or and at the same time some kind of encouragement or remembrance about the rewards that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will offer. This is in a nutshell what admonition is meant to be. Then you have the Quran. Many scholars say that at least one complete verse of the Quran must be recited in a khutbah. Now, what it really means is that some Arabic portion of a verse or a verse of Quran that makes sense by itself. So if I said, for example, if I read wal asr, by time, I swear by time, that doesn't make sense by itself. It needs to be complete in meaning. So it could be like, wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr. I swear by time, humanity is in loss. This does have meaning to it, does make sense, and as a minimum, that would suffice. So just to be clear, it needs to be said in Arabic, and if you can't remember it, you should write it down in your notes, at least one Arabic verse of the Quran, or a portion of an Arabic verse that makes sense by itself. So for example, the verse which begins, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, La taqrabu as-salata wa antum sukara. Believers, don't go near the prayer when you are intoxicated. Now the verse continues on, giving more details about other things. But just that part there makes sense. And it could be used, for example, when you're in a khutbah to do with taking drugs and intoxicants. And that would meet the minimum requirement. So one verse of the Quran or a part of a verse that makes sense. Some scholars also add that there should be at least one hadith, again said in Arabic, either a complete hadith or a part of the hadith that makes sense by itself. For example, you said, Al-mu'minu mira al-mu'min. The believer is a mirror to another believer. In Arabic, and then translating to English, of course. The language thing is going to come up later on, but those that are doing it in English would then translate it, but the minimum requirement will be met. After that, a dua must be said in a khutbah, usually at the end, and the scholars specify that it should be a collective dua. So a Rabbana dua, when you say, oh Allah, oh our Master, give us this, save us from this, etc., etc. So if you said, as a minimum, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ, then this would suffice that minimum requirement as well. It's a collective dua, but it could be anything. Allahumma a'izz al-Islam wal Muslimin, etc., etc. Some of the scholars also add that there should be the shahadatain. So you say la ilaha illallah. So you can say la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. Any variations like this. Now, a lot of these conditions are already fulfilled in the khutbatul haja. Yes. So if I now read to you khutbatul haja and you memorize this, or you have it written down and you read this in the beginning of the khutbah, then most of these conditions are already met from the get-go. And that is a huge relief for somebody who would struggle with some of these other things, and inshallah would make the khutbah sound for every single person. So listen carefully and memorize khutbah al-haja, because even though the khutbah al-haja itself, in alhamdulillah, nahmadu wa nasta'inu, that in and of itself is not a condition to be read for the khutbah to be sound. It is considered sunnah as an optional thing, a recommended thing, but at the same time, it hits all of those conditions that we have mentioned. So for that reason, I recommend saying it from the beginning and memorizing the Arabic. So it goes as follows. Inna alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. فَمَنْ يَهْدِهِ اللَّهُ فَلَا مُضِلَّ لَهُ وَمَنْ يُضْلِلْ فَلَا هَادِيَ لَهُ وَأَشْهَدُ أَنْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَحْدَهُ لَا شَرِيكَ لَهُ وَأَشْهَدُ أَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا عَبْدُهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. Now, just that much, you've already praised Allah, you've already said the shahadatain as well, and you've already said a dua as well. Yes, though it's not meant to be a dua, there is a dua in this, because you say, oh Allah, we seek refuge in you from the evil of ourselves and from the evil of our actions. This is a collective dua as well. So you've already knocked out at least 3 things. Thereafter, it is reported that the Prophet would add to this 3 verses of the Quran. So even if you just said one of them, for example, the one in Surah Al-Imran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha haqqa tuqatihi wa la tamutunna illa wa antum muslimun. That would be the one Arabic verse, which is a requirement. And if you really want to be cheeky, the khutbah al-haja is a hadith. It's reported from the Prophet ﷺ. So in a way, you've already said a hadith as well in Arabic. So this is another reason why learning the khutbah al-haja is very useful. Even though it's not obligatory to say it, saying it does fulfill some of those conditions that we have mentioned. All that is left then is to say salah on the Prophet ﷺ, which you can do at the end, and you make your dua as well. So let's just run through those conditions again, because obviously they are super important. So the first one is praising Allah. Second one, sending salah on the Prophet ﷺ. Third one, instructing some kind of maw'idah, serious counsel, or reminding people about being mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Complete verse of the Quran, a complete hadith, or a part of the Quranic verse, or part of a hadith that makes sense by itself, and then the dua for the collective, the believers. And lastly, the 2 shahadas. Yes, the 2 shahadas. So this, if you think about it, is not really that much to remember. Especially if you do it a number of times, you will make sure that you hit all these things. But the main thing is that from the beginning, you are learned enough to meet these minimum requirements. If you cannot, then you have reasonable grounds to say, maybe I should do this, somebody else should do it instead. So these are the minimum things. Now, if you're thinking about, okay, there are other things as well that I should be doing, right? I should be standing up when I do my khutbah, should be sitting down in between. So there's a 2 parts of the khutbah, saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to the congregation in the very beginning before the adhan. These are all sunnahs. They are not the fundamentals. Therefore, if they are left out, or for whatever reason you are unable to do that, they wouldn't affect the validity of that khutbah. Not according to any of the scholars, because that's the way I've divided the list. The minimum requirements are those that I mentioned. Everything else is optional according to all scholars. And with those things, there are differences of opinion. So for example, beginning with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to the congregation. According to the Hanafis, this is not part of the khutbah that the Imam should do. Therefore, if you are in a Hanafi masjid, then you should be sensible and leave that out. You should just start with the khutbah after the adhan. Standing obviously is sunnah, and that's something that you should do. Some scholars said that it's just highly recommended to do that. So therefore, not sitting down, standing. Obviously, if you cannot stand, then you will sit. And the break in between, again, there's no reason why you would skip that out. But technically speaking, if there was a situation where there was no sitting in between, then according to the scholars, that would still be acceptable. So this is the minimum requirements of the khutbah. In the next video, we're going to explain how to prepare the content of your khutbah, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan, barakallah feekum.